Network security. It's a topic that just keeps getting more and more vital as we move even more into this digital world, right?
Absolutely. It really does.
And we're all about giving you the tools and knowledge you need to navigate this complex landscape.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to break down what network security actually is, why it should be at the top of every organization's priority list.
For sure.
And most importantly, how can you prevent yourself from becoming the next big cyber attack headline?
Right. Nobody wants that.
Okay, so imagine for a second, all of your organization's data, like this valuable treasure chest, right?
Oh, I like that.
Network security. That's the fortress you build around it.
It is. You got to protect it from those thieves, those intruders who are constantly lurking out there.
They are out there. So let's get specific here. What exactly is network security? Can you give us a clear definition?
Well, in the simplest terms, it's every measure you take to protect your digital assets. I mean, we're talking unauthorized access, use, disclosure. You don't want anyone messing with your data, whether that's disruption, modification, or even destruction.
So it's not just about those hackers in hoodies we always see in the movies.
Right. It's more than that. Yeah.
It's about keeping that data safe no matter what, huh?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We're talking confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what happens, natural disaster, internal slip-up, external threat. Got to be ready for it all.
Okay, so those three things, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, why are they so crucial? Like, why should organizations really be losing sleep over this stuff?
Because the fallout from a security breach, I mean, it can be absolutely devastating.
Hey.
Think about it. Your customer database leaked online for everyone to see.
Oh.
Or your financial systems held hostage by ransomware. The damage, oh, it can be far-reaching.
We've all seen those headlines. And no organization wants to be the one making news for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Nope, no one.
Okay, so let's walk through this. What actually happens during a cyber attack? Paint us a picture.
Can be sneaky, you know. You might notice some weird network activity.
Oh.
Maybe a bunch of failed login attempts more than usual. And then things start to escalate. Systems could slow down, crash altogether. You might see data getting corrupted or, even worse, completely stolen.
Oh, wow.
And then the dreaded ransom demand pops up. Pay up, they say, or kiss your precious data goodbye.
Oh, that's terrifying. It sounds like total chaos. So how do we prevent this digital mayhem from happening in the first place?
Well, one of the most fundamental principles is what we call layered defense. It's just like protecting your home, right? You wouldn't just rely on a single lock on your front door. You want multiple security measures all working together. Think firewalls, intrusion detection systems, strong passwords, the whole shebang. And don't forget those regular security audits, too.
So it's about building a whole ecosystem of security measures, right?
Yeah.
Not just relying on one magic solution.
You got it. That's the key.
And you mentioned firewalls earlier. Can you break those down for us a bit more? What exactly do they do?
Okay, picture a firewall as this gatekeeper. It's standing guard at the entrance to your network, and it's checking out every single piece of traffic that tries to come in or go out.
Oh, okay.
It's comparing this traffic to a set of rules that you've defined.
I see.
If the traffic matches the rules, green light, it can pass through.
Good.
But if it doesn't, the firewall throws up a big stop sign, no entry for you. That's how it keeps those potentially harmful activities out of your network.
So it's like a digital bouncer for your network.
Exactly.
But how do firewalls know what's good traffic and what's bad? I mean, how are those rules decided?
It's all about customization. Every organization is going to have its own unique needs and its own risk tolerance. So you might decide to block access to certain websites that are known for phishing scams, for example. Or you could allow employees to use work-related apps but restrict social media during work hours. It all comes down to your specific security objectives.
So it's really tailored to each organization's specific situation and goals. It's pretty fascinating how much thought goes into building this digital fortress. Okay, firewalls are the gatekeepers, but what happens if something manages to slip past them? What other layers of defense are we talking about?
Well, that's where intrusion detection systems come into play, or IDS for short.
IDS.
Think of them as your security cameras, always keeping an eye on your network for any suspicious activity. They're constantly analyzing traffic patterns, looking for anything that just doesn't look right.
So they're like those detectives in the movies, always searching for clues.
You got it.
What kind of things would trigger an IDS to raise the alarm?
Oh, all sorts of things. They might see a sudden spike in traffic coming from one particular source, or maybe a ton of failed login attempts in a short period of time, or someone trying to access files that they shouldn't have permission to.
Oh, okay.
When they detect something fishy, they send an alert to the security team so they can investigate further.
So the IDS is like the watchful eye, but it's still up to human experts to determine if there's a real threat and take action.
That's right.
You mentioned secure configurations earlier. What exactly does that mean, and why is it so important?
Well, even with the toughest firewalls and the most vigilant IDSs, if your systems and applications aren't set up correctly from a security standpoint, you're leaving yourself wide open to attacks.
Oh, okay.
Secure configurations are all about making sure your systems are locked down tight. We're talking about using strong passwords, enabling encryption, disabling unnecessary services, and keeping your software up to date with the latest security patches. It's all about closing those gaps and making it much harder for attackers to get in.
So it's like making sure every brick in your fortress is solid and every weak point is reinforced. I'm starting to see how all these different pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked a lot about protecting the fortress, but what about understanding the potential attackers? How do organizations even know what threats they're facing?
That's where understanding the threat, vulnerability, risk trifecta comes in.
Okay, break that down for me.
A threat is anything that could potentially harm your systems or data. Think hackers, malware, natural disasters, anything that could disrupt your operations. A vulnerability is a weakness in your system that an attacker could exploit.
Oh, I see.
Maybe it's an outdated software program or a misconfigured server. And risk is the likelihood that a threat will actually exploit a vulnerability and cause some damage.
So it's about understanding who might be trying to break in, where the weak points are, and how likely they are to succeed. Sounds like a pretty complex puzzle.
They can be, for sure.
How do organizations even start to make sense of all this?
Well, you start by figuring out what your most critical assets are, what data and systems are absolutely essential to your business. Then you identify the potential threats and vulnerabilities and figure out how likely it is that each risk will actually materialize. This helps you prioritize your efforts and focus on the things that pose the greatest danger.
It's like a constant game of chess, right?
Yeah.
Trying to anticipate the attacker's moves and
Right.
stay one step ahead.
Exactly.
Speaking of access and control, our listener had a specific question about AAA in network security. Can you explain what that stands for and why it's so important?
AAA stands for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting.
Okay.
It's the framework that underpins how you manage who gets access to what on your network. And it's all about keeping track of what they do once they're in.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. First, we have authentication. What exactly does that involve?
Authentication is all about verifying a user's identity. It's like asking, who are you and can you prove it? This could be through passwords, tokens, biometrics, or even a combination of those methods.
So it's like digital passport control, making sure everyone entering the network is who they say they are.
Exactly.
What happens once someone's identity is verified?
That's where authorization comes in. It determines what resources and actions a user is allowed to access based on their role, their permissions, and other criteria. So an employee might be able to access specific files and applications related to their job, while a guest user might only have access to limited areas of the network.
So authentication confirms who you are, and then authorization decides what you're allowed to do once you're in. Got it. What about that third A, accounting? What's that all about?
Accounting is all about keeping a record of what users are doing on the network. We're talking about logging their activity, like what files they accessed, when they logged in and out, and what commands they executed.
Oh, so there's a whole trail of what everyone's doing.
It's super important for auditing, for detecting any suspicious behavior, and investigating security incidents. It's like having a digital trail of breadcrumbs, you know?
Yeah, so you can see exactly what happened if something goes wrong.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part, from firewalls to intrusion detection systems to the crucial role of AAA. It's clear that network security is a complex and multifaceted field.
It is, yeah.
We're just getting started. There's so much more to explore.
Oh, absolutely. We've only just scratched the surface.
So join us next time as we continue to delve into the ever-evolving world of network security. We'll be uncovering more layers of protection and exploring practical strategies to keep your digital assets safe and sound. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're diving even deeper into network security today, peeling back more layers of this, well, let's face it, pretty complex world.
It is, but it's fascinating too.
Oh, absolutely. Last time, we got the basics down, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, those secure configurations, and of course, the importance of AAA.
Right, and we can't forget that threat, vulnerability, and risk trifecta. If If you want a solid security setup, that's got to be front and center.
Totally agree. Now, we got some great questions from our listener about different types of firewalls. We touched on them briefly before, but let's unpack those a bit more, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, packet filtering firewalls. It sounds like they're scrutinizing every single little piece of data trying to get into the network. Is that right?
That's a great way to put it. They work at a very granular level, inspecting each individual data packet against a set of rules you define.
Okay.
Those rules, they could be looking at things like the source and destination IP addresses, the port numbers, or even specific protocols being used.
So it's like having a super meticulous border guard checking every item in your luggage.
Exactly. They're looking for anything suspicious, anything that just doesn't belong.
So what happens if they find something that doesn't pass muster, something that breaks those rules?
Boom. Firewall blocks it right then and there, prevents it from entering or leaving the network. It's a fast and efficient way to filter out those obvious threats based on those preset criteria.
Okay, makes sense. But those packet filtering firewalls, they have some limitations, right?
They do. Their biggest weakness is they don't really have a memory of past packets.
Oh, okay.
So they can't really detect those more sneaky attacks, the ones that might use multiple packets or have these really subtle patterns. They just see each packet in isolation.
Ah, I see. So for those trickier threats, we need a firewall with a better memory, right? Something that can keep track of what's come before.
You got it. That's where stateful inspection firewalls come in.
Okay, tell us more about those.
So they keep this running log, we call it a state table, of all the active connections.
Aye.
And this allows them to analyze packets, not just on their own, but in the context of that whole ongoing conversation between devices. That makes them way better at spotting malicious activity that could slip past a simple packet filtering firewall.
So they're paying attention to the entire conversation, not just individual words, so to speak.
Exactly. They can tell if a packet is part of a legitimate back and forth or if it's just coming out of nowhere, which could be a sign of someone probing or trying to attack. That ability to track the state of connections makes them way more effective at blocking threats that try to blend in with normal traffic.
Got it. So we've got packet filtering, which is fast but kind of basic, and then stateful inspection, which is more thorough but maybe adds a bit more overhead. Where do application layer firewalls fit into all of this?
These guys, they operate at a higher level. They're less concerned with the network traffic itself and more focused on the actual applications. They can actually understand the specific protocols used by different applications, like HTTP for web traffic or SMTP for email.
Wow, so they're not just checking packets and connections, they're actually understanding the language of the applications themselves.
Precisely. They can actually look at the content of the data being transmitted, what we call deep packet inspection, and identify potentially malicious code or suspicious patterns that might be hidden within normal-looking traffic.
It's like having a security expert who can not only check IDs at the door, but also understand multiple languages and pick up on those subtle cues that something's not quite right. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about intrusion detection systems, those IDSs. We mentioned network-based IDS before, the ones that monitor traffic across the whole network. Can you remind us how those work?
Sure. Network-based IDSs, they're strategically placed within the network, so they have this bird's eye view of a ton of traffic.
Right.
They're constantly looking for patterns in the data flowing through, searching for anything that deviates from the norm or matches known attack signatures.
Okay, so what kind of things would trigger an alert? What would catch their attention?
Well, they might see a huge sudden spike in traffic coming from one particular source, or maybe a bunch of failed login attempts in a short period. Or if someone's trying to access files that they shouldn't have permission to, that would definitely raise a red flag. When something looks fishy, they send an alert to the security team so they can investigate further.
So the IDS is raising the alarm, but it's ultimately up to the humans to figure out if there's a real threat and take action. Now, what about host-based IDSs? How do those differ from the network-based ones?
So host-based IDSs, or HIDS for short, they're installed directly on a specific device or server. They're not looking at network traffic, but focusing on what's happening within that host system itself.
Okay.
This could be anything from system calls to file accesses to how different processes are behaving.
So it's like having a security guard stationed inside each device, watching everything that's going on very closely.
Exactly. And they're particularly good at detecting things like malware infections, insider threats, or any attempts to tamper with sensitive data that's stored on that device.
It seems like having both network-based and host-based IDS working together would give you a really comprehensive picture of what's happening from a security standpoint.
Absolutely. The more perspectives you have, the better. Network-based IDSs give you that broad view of the network traffic, while host-based IDSs zoom in on what's happening on individual devices. Together, they can really help organizations detect and respond to those security incidents much more effectively.
We've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of firewalls and intrusion detection systems today. It's amazing to see how these different pieces work in concert to protect organizations from this, well, frankly, ever-changing landscape of cyber threats.
It is constantly evolving, that's for sure, but there's still so much more to uncover, so many practical strategies to explore.
So join us next time as we continue our deep dive into the world of network security. We'll be tackling those critical areas of secure configurations and patch management. Welcome back to the deep dive. As we wrap up our exploration of network security, I gotta say, it's been a wild ride.
It really has. We've covered a ton of ground, from the fundamentals of firewalls and intrusion detection systems to the critical importance of understanding those threats, vulnerabilities, and risks.
And we can't forget about those 3 A's. Authentication, authorization, and accounting. They're like the gatekeepers of who gets access to what.
Absolutely. Now, our listener has pointed out a couple more crucial areas from the source material that we should definitely touch on.
Okay, what are they?
Secure configurations and patch management. They're really interested in the practical side of things.
Those sound pretty essential. Let's start with secure configurations. We mentioned that principle of least privilege before. Can you refresh our memory on what that means and why it matters so much?
The principle of least privilege is all about reducing risk. It means you only give users and devices the absolute minimum level of access they need to do their jobs.
Okay.
It's like, instead of giving everyone a master key that unlocks every door in the building, you give them a key card that only works for the specific areas they need to access.
So it's not about being restrictive just for the sake of it, but about limiting the potential damage if something does go wrong, like an account gets compromised or a device is lost.
Exactly. If everyone has access to everything, a single breach could be disastrous. But if you keep access tightly controlled, you can really contain the damage.
That makes perfect sense. Now, our listener also brought up benchmark standards in relation to secure configurations. What are those, and how can organizations use them to their advantage?
Benchmark standards, they're basically like sets of best practices and guidelines for securely configuring all your systems and applications. Think of them like blueprints for security. They give you detailed recommendations on everything from password policies and firewall rules to operating system settings.
So instead of starting from scratch, organizations can use these existing standards as a solid foundation for their own configurations.
Exactly. And these standards are developed and maintained by organizations like the Center for Internet Security, or CIS. They're constantly being updated to reflect the latest threats and vulnerabilities, so you know you're working with the most current and relevant guidance.
It's like having a team of security experts constantly tweaking the blueprints to help you build the strongest fortress possible. Now, I gotta say, even with all these blueprints and best practices, managing secure configurations across a whole organization sounds like a huge undertaking. Are there tools that can make this easier?
Absolutely. There are these things called configuration management tools. They allow you to automate that whole process of applying and enforcing security settings across your entire infrastructure.
Okay.
So instead of manually configuring each individual device, you just define the desired settings once, and the tool takes care of the rest.
That sounds like a huge time saver. Plus, it probably cuts down on the risk of human error too, right?
Big time. And they do more than just set things up. These tools also continuously monitor your systems to make sure they stay compliant with your security policies, alerting you if anything goes off track. Some can even automatically fix those issues.
It's like having a little robot security guard that's constantly making its rounds, checking that everything is locked down tight. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about another crucial part of network security patch management. Why is this so important?
Software vulnerabilities are just a fact of life. New ones are popping up all the time, and attackers are constantly on the lookout for ways to exploit them. Patches are updates that software vendors release to fix those vulnerabilities and keep your systems from being compromised.
So it's like patching up holes in your armor before someone can get a sword through it.
Exactly. Patch management is all about staying on top of all the software running in your organization, figuring out what patches you need, testing them to make sure they don't cause any problems, and then deploying them quickly and efficiently to all the affected devices.
That sounds like a never-ending task. Any tips on how to manage all that effectively?
For sure. One key thing is to prioritize patching based on risk. So if there's a critical vulnerability that could lead to something like remote code execution or a data breach, you got to address that ASAP. But if it's something less severe, you can probably deal with it on a more flexible schedule.
So it's about understanding the potential impact of each vulnerability and using your resources wisely.
Right. You don't want to just be patching everything as fast as possible, but being strategic and tackling the biggest threats first. It's also super important to have a thorough test-it process to make sure those patches don't introduce any new problems or compatibility issues.
Makes sense. And always have a backup plan in case you need to go back to an older version of the software if a patch does cause trouble.
Exactly.
It seems like patch management is a constant battle against an ever-changing landscape of vulnerabilities.
It is. But with the right tools and processes and a proactive mindset, it's a battle you can definitely win. Staying ahead of the game with patch management is key to maintaining a strong security posture and protecting your data and systems.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've covered a lot of territory, from the nitty-gritty of firewalls and intrusion detection systems to the practical steps of implementing secure configurations and managing patches. What's clear is that network security isn't a one-and-done deal. It takes constant vigilance, adapting to new threats, and always striving to do better.
It's definitely a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey every organization needs to be on if they want to succeed in this digital world.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And to our listener, we encourage you to keep learning, stay informed, and never underestimate the importance of protecting your digital assets.
Stay safe out there, everyone.
And until next time, keep those digital fortresses strong.